Okay, it's been about, well, it's been 3 days. However, I turned off the tumblers after about 24 to 26 hours, something like that, because I checked on the pieces and they're done in the fine grit. So here is a piece, and it's not really showing any uneven wear. The surface is relatively smooth. So that piece is done. Here's a large corner. Unfortunately, these corners get packed full of grit. Okay, so the surface of the corner that actually shows is just these three faces. And the corners are showing a decent amount of wear right on that tip. So the three parts that stick out, large pieces wear much faster than small pieces. And it's also showing wear down here, but this is just mechanism. This doesn't matter at all. And so if I left these pieces in for too long, they'd actually wear a hole through that spot right there. So I just have to call them done. Here is a large edge wing piece, and it's not really showing a lot of wear, like uneven. Oh, I take it back. There's a lot of uneven wear right on this surface right here. But that wouldn't create a hole, or it would take a very long time before that created a hole. I guess there might be a teeny tiny bit uneven wear on that tip, but I don't really see it. The surface is pretty decent. It should polish up pretty nicely when I put it in the porcelain. Here's a smaller piece. The smaller pieces are an odd shape, but because they're small, relatively low mass, I could tumble them for a lot longer without any issues. The only part of these things that show is just this face right here. And that face seems to be wearing pretty well. Here's another relatively small piece. And this is the only part of the face that shows on the outside of the puzzle. And it's wearing pretty well. Here's a center post that goes into the core. These things don't actually need to be tumbled at all. I don't think anything rubs against them. But it'd be kind of a pain to fish them all out, so I didn't bother. Not really doing any harm one way or another by leaving them in. There we go. Here's a big internal 3x3x3 edge. It's not the external portion, so none of this piece shows through, and it's showing significant amounts of uneven wear on that face right there, right on the edge. Must just be the way the thing is shaped. It gets really heavy. A lot of powder packs into the bottom of it, and this must be the way this thing sticks out, that it wears really, really heavily. However, none of that is needed for mechanical interaction, so it just doesn't matter. Here, this is interesting. This linked up inside the tumbler. This is somewhat common actually for pieces that go together to link together. The problem when this happens is it acts like one big piece, and so then this thing wears much faster, and so you can see uneven wear on the tip right there and the tip right there. It won't matter, but yeah. Okay. This is if I recall correctly, a 5x5x5 middle edge. And it fills with powder. so it gets relatively heavy in the tumbler, although it's a relatively small piece. The only two faces on this thing that show externally are this one and this one. I'm not seeing any real uneven wear. It's probably the bulk of the pieces. Here we go. This must be a 5x5x5 plus center. It's a really small piece, so it means it wears slowly. This is the only face that shows, and it's going to polish up pretty nicely. And then in the other tumbler, I'll reach behind me here, is a 5x5x5, no, excuse me, a 3x3x3 corner. And these pieces, because of their really weird shape and because they're relatively heavy, wear extremely unevenly very quickly. So there is uneven wear right along in here and right along in here, and that's true on all three of these. But because this is the only portion that shows, it'll just look like a slightly larger fillet, so it's no big deal. Let me pull another one of those and show another one. Yeah, uneven wear right there, and uneven wear right there, and right there. But it doesn't matter. There's also uneven wear on the bottom, on the foot mechanism part, but once again, that's not needed for mechanical interaction, so it doesn't matter. So, what you need to do now is vacuum all the fine grit out and then get these pieces super clean. Super clean for the porcelain. Last time I discovered that boiling the parts after I get them super clean, or after I get all the fine grit out, really speeds up the porcelain, the phase at which the porcelain starts to actually polish the pieces nicely. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to I'm going to vacuum all the grit out, and then I'm going to dump all the parts into a big old cook pot and boil them on my oven for a few hours and then get them going again. So I'm going to get that started now. Okay, I think I'm all set up here. So, once again, I've connected my vacuum to my dust separator. Got my household vacuum set up on the tumbler. Put the mesh over the hose. Centered. There we go. Get my nozzle that I cut on. I vacuumed my filter pretty well, actually. It came out pretty good, so the filter's looking pretty white, and I vacuumed out the inside of the shop vac. So we'll be able to see how much of the fine grit makes it past the dust separator. I also cleaned out the dust separator bucket. Okay, so I'm going to start my household vacuum, then I'm going to start my main shop vac, then I'm going to start the tumbler, and last time I picked up fine grit, the static electricity buildup was pretty intense. Hopefully I don't have the same problem this time. That's not good. A hole developed in the net. There's a hole. Which means there's a bunch of parts in here. Which means I have to screen all this grit. That's gonna suck. Well, there's still a decent amount of grit in the bottom of this. And the nozzle's not picking it up very well, because when I get the tip down into the tumbler, it just pulls air through the sides and it doesn't pull air through the bottom. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to cut a new screen that doesn't have a hole, and I'm going to tape up the channels on the side here, probably just leave a little bit, and then hopefully be able to pull the rest of the fine grit out of the bottom of this thing. So it's going to take me a little bit of time. I'll resume the video when I'm ready. Well, it's been several days. I didn't have the time or energy to do this. I got busy during the week, so I just cut a new screen, and apparently the vacuum pulls grit with so much force that it just sandblasted the screen to nothing. Okay, and I am going to actually tape these slots because my modifications make it hard to pick up the last little bit of grit at the bottom of the tumbler. Okay, so now the only opening is right there. Okay, I think that's... Oh, I need to take off my watch. The grit is extremely hard on watches. Okay, so... really slow and inefficient. It's very hard to get the last little bit of grit out of the bottom. Let's see if I can capture it with the camera better. Alrighty. Let's see how that works.
Oh, crap. Well, I managed to knock the tumbler off of the metal plate it's standing on, so I gotta move it. When it gets lighter, it's easier to push around. Okay. There we go.
Well, I think I got all the grit out of this. So I need to still boil all the... Well, I have to screen all this grit. All the fine grit that's in my dust separator, because I'm sure there's pieces in it. And I need to vacuum out the small tumbler, so I'm going to do that next. Last time I did this, the static buildup was ridiculous, so I'm going to have to do it a little bit slower. seems to have gotten all the grit for the corners. Corners looking pretty good. So all that's left now is to screen the grit in my dust separator over here, and then I guess boil the pieces. So I'll do those in separate videos. Well, this is why I hate fine grit so much. As you saw in the previous videos, when I vacuumed the coarse grit, the filter did fine. But the filter from the fine grit is probably destroyed. It's packed completely full of fine grit. All of the fins are packed full. I'm surprised the vacuum even had any suction. And I'm concerned that the grit's so fine, some of it probably got pulled through the filter. So I might have pulled dust through the vacuum, which is what destroyed the last one. So I need to find an alternative. Maybe do 2 dust separators or something. I don't know exactly. When I had this problem last time, before I had the dust separator, it was caked on even more. And I got like these reusable washable filters that go over, and then there's a retaining ring. But the filter got so heavy from dust buildup on it that it actually pulled free of the retaining ring, and then I pulled large quantities of grit through the motor over a few second period of time. This probably pulled small quantities of grit through the motor over a long period of time, assuming that any of it could get through. I'm not really sure. So I guess the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to vacuum the filter, and then I have to screen all the grit because the grit was able to sandblast through the little screen that I had, which allowed pieces to get inside the grit. So here goes with the vacuuming first. I'm using my household vacuum, which is actually better at separating separating dust from air than even my dust separator, but here goes. To put it. Lots of dust still coming off of it, so I guess I'll put it on my kitchen floor for now. And if the filter did its job, there should be no dust. No dust at all in this foam protector. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it off, and I'm going to wash it, and I'm going to see if any dust comes out. Alrighty. So I've already found that you have to use soap, otherwise the dust doesn't come out. Actually, it seems pretty clean. The water I'm squeezing out is mostly clear. That's a pretty good sign. Normally I use my hair blow dryer to dry this, but I'm just going to set it down for purposes of this video. Here's the part I really hate. I just can't stand screening the fine grit because of the mess it makes. It's fine grit from the filter. I already pulled my filter and the dust collection chamber off of my household vacuum, and in the process of having it sit in the center of the tumbler, it managed to pick up 3 pieces. So if you're going to use a vacuum, make sure you always screen every vacuum, even the ones you don't think picked up any pieces, because pieces end up in crazy places. Should have kept this thing dry, because it needs to be somewhat dry since I'm going to be pouring grit through it, and I hate it when the grit clumps. Normally, again, I'd use my hair blow dryer, but that's too slow for a video. Alrighty, so here's what I got. This is the bucket that the fine grit is going into, and this is the fine grit from my dust. Oh boy! Whew. I think it weighs like 70, 80 pounds, something like that. So this is the fine grit from my dust separator, and I am going to scoop grit. I don't want to use my nice new glassware because it scratches the glass until it becomes frosted. I'm going to find my other glassware. There it is. And of course it's wet. Okay. So the dust is going to be coming off of this bucket. Get my air filters in here. I cleaned off these air filters and replaced their filters before the video. And whenever processing fine grit and pouring fine grit, I'm going to use my gas mask. It's like, this is an organic vapor gas mask. It's way more than adequate for fine grit. It can filter out smoke and biological hazards, that sort of thing. But it's going to prevent me from talking. Alrighty. Well, I'm confused as to why I didn't find any pieces in that grit. It's a good sign, but there was a hole, and there should be pieces. So I'm wondering if the pieces made it through the dust separator and into the shop vac. So I'm going to go get the shop vac bowl and find out. Good mess. Weird. So even though there was a hole in the screen, somehow pieces didn't make it through it. That doesn't make any sense to me. I would have expected pieces to have gone through the screen. Yeah, that's really confusing. I don't know what that's about. But there's clearly no pieces. So I guess it is what it is. I don't think that they could have got stuck in the hose, and plus I've already done a good job of shaking the hose. So I guess the grit was able to blast a hole through the screen, but no pieces made it through the hole. Kind of a miracle. That's unexpected. Well, so the next thing to do is to boil the pieces to get all the fine grit that's in their pores out, so that the grit doesn't leak out into the porcelain, and that just screws up the porcelain, causes me to have to change the water a bunch. So that's what I'm going to do next. Alrighty, I have taken the tumbler bowls off, put the parts. Those are the 3x3x3 corners. And of course pieces go everywhere. Hopefully I didn't lose any. That's what extra pieces are for. Okay, started the water behind me. Warm it up. The good news is there's like no fine grit residue really in the bowl, or very minor anyways. Fill this up with water, which is going to take a while. One thing I should mention is that I'm going to add soap. The pieces, the grit adheres to the surface of the pieces and increases their surface area, and the grit is pretty hydrophobic, and I think the nylon is also slightly hydrophobic. I'm not sure, but it causes the pieces to want to float. And so by adding soap, I can break the surface tension barrier and really help penetrate into the pieces. I'm just filling this with hot water right now to speed up the process by which it boils. And then I'm going to boil it for probably a couple hours. I don't really have a set time limit. I don't know how quickly the grit comes out. It might be that once I get it to a boil, it'll probably only need to boil for 5 minutes. I don't know. But there's no harm in just letting it sit and boil. And then I'll periodically check on it and top it off to make sure that it isn't, boiling down too much. Filling up with more water here. I'm going to add the soap now so that it disperses throughout. I think it's mostly centered on my burner. Set it to high there. And alrighty, I'm gonna let that go. In my experience, well, there's a lot of open surface area here, and the metal on this giant pot is pretty thin, so it loses a lot of heat. So if I cover it to reduce evaporation, and then I usually put a weight, it's a 500 gram weight on the top. That helps keep it down and helps it heat faster. Invariably, it's going to boil over, and usually when it boils over, it leaves just a nasty residue along the side that's full of soap and tons of fine grit that's been boiled out. But you know, I don't really have a way of skimming. If I had some sort of device to like skim off the top as the soap and grit came to the surface, that'd be great. But I don't have such a device, and I'm not aware of any device, so I'm not even sure what I would search for, or whether or not it would be feasible for my kitchen. So I'm going to let this sit for a few hours, and I will resume the video when it's made more progress. Well, it's boiling over now. It's been boiling over for quite some time, and I wanted to show what the water that boils over looks like. So, let me see if I can do this here. So, here is, it's leaving a bunch of residue, and even the water's running along my stove, and if I wipe up the water comes up pretty black. And that black, ouch, just got hit by a spatter. That black is from grit in the water. And you can see the buildup right there. That's just tons and tons of grit. And then there's grit buildup on the side. So it's gotten less aggressive in the boiling over because I think a lot of the soap has been diminished. And so I'm probably going to add... Ooh, this is filthy. This is not just ridiculously filthy. So I'm going to add more soap and water so that it boils over more aggressively. Because I don't know of any other way to skim so see there's a ring of grit along there. I'll wash off the sink. And there's a ring of grit all along here. pot, along the side of the pot. Let me see if I can show this. And I just wiped a lot of the grit free. So I'm going to put the lid back on, and I'm going to let it boil over some more. And by repeating this process a few times, I will get most of the grit out of the pieces and out of the water. And then they'll be ready for the porcelain, where they will work a lot better without the grit. And it'll save, actually, this will save me time, because I'll have to change the water less. So I'm going to keep this up for a couple more hours, and then I'll get them in the porcelain. Alrighty, I wiped off the rim around the top, and I let it boil over for a fourth time. And this time, in the process of boiling over, it hasn't left any residue, or very little anyways. Which I think means that most of the grit is out of the pieces and most of the grit is out of the water. So I think it's ready. Alrighty. So I'm going to move this over to my sink, which is always a little bit dangerous. You know, this is about 5 gallons of boiling water. If I drop this, well, I'd probably die. The level of burns would not be good. That's why I got a pot with extremely sturdy, riveted handles. Alrighty. The amount of grit that came out onto my stove is really out of control. It's just a sludge. Alrighty, let's see if I can give this a try. So there it is in my sink. Here's the lid to the tumbler, which I'm going to set down. Small tumbler bowl right here. So what I need to do, is scoop pieces out into here. Fish out the corners. The corners are going to go into the small tumbler bowl. And the rest of the pieces are going to go into the big tumbler bowl. I never have enough kitchen space for all of this, and I've got a bunch of stuff back here that I should have cleaned off, but I just didn't really feel like I had the time or the patience or the motivation to do so. Down my stove a little bit more. Once the grit dries on my stove, when all the water evaporates, it becomes a lot harder to get off, so keep wiping it down periodically. Alrighty, here we go. Cold water. Two 3x3x3 corners. Oh, 3. Those things are hard to spot. Yikes, 4. Oh, this is going to be challenging to spot them. Notice the pieces look black, well, actually look like a dark charcoal gray. That's from the grit. If you'll recall, I put these pieces in completely white. And the grit, I use a silicon carbide grit, dyes the pieces. I don't really know what the chemical process is that causes them to dye. It might actually be tiny bits of grit embedded in the pieces that makes them black. They actually get quite a bit whiter in the porcelain sphere stage. So I don't know if that means that grit is being pounded out of the surface, or if this actual nylon that's been dyed black that gets worn off. I'm not exactly sure. And unfortunately, I've put the pieces under my microscope, but most optical microscopes are designed to look through things, you know, so light source goes through them. And I don't have a way of slicing the nylon thin enough to look through it very well. So that limits my ability to see what's going on. Plus, an optical microscope doesn't really tell you what happened on a chemical surface anyways. Or, you know, on the surface of something chemically. So I don't think I'm ever really going to know unless I do a lot of research into silicon carbide. And that's probably above my education level. It's hard to see with all the steam. That's hot. Ow! I burned myself nice and good on that glass. Okay, well, I think got all the corners out. By the way, I washed the tumbler bowl really thoroughly. Scrubbed the inside, all that good stuff. There's quite a bit of cleaning work that has to be done that I haven't shown on camera. Cleaning the vacuums, cleaning the filters, replacing the filters, vacuuming my floor after I spill grit, cleaning the bowls, cleaning my stove. You know, there's just quite a bit of work that isn't really a part of the tumbling process, but is cleanup needed to do either before or after, usually after the tumbling process. And there's just no way around it. Unless I could prevent the mess from happening in the first place, and I think that would require, you know, industrial commercial equipment in order to, you know, an actual commercial space, you know, factory floor type of setup with machines specifically designed for this, so that they can contain everything. Well, that's a broken one. This probably was broken when I put it in. This is tricky. Here's a piece wedged in the center there. Another piece wedged in. Shoot, I don't... There we go. Yeah, I think the foot is actually broken off of that piece. Pieces are really hot, very hard to touch. Like, just touching them, they're extremely hot. That's why I'm adding more cold water to this. This is one of Carl's Bubbleism course that I threw in for the ride. Oh, more pieces wedged in. Ah, this is out of control. This is a bubbleoid core. So far I've seen 3 broken corners. Fortunately there's lots of extras. Here's my pot. It's got grit kind of all the way around it. So that's good though. That's all grit that's not in the pieces. These are a little bit too hard to touch and stir through still. Pretty painful. So there's the interaction of 2 pieces. These things are going to turn great. Alrighty, I don't see any more corners. Wouldn't surprise me if a corner slipped by and made it in here. I doubt the porcelain spheres will damage the corners, but you never really know. Actually, what will damage the corners is when I'm taking pieces out when I'm changing the water. And I scoop pieces. That'll definitely break any corners that happen to get caught by my glass as I scoop. Also, when I'm scooping, I have to be careful for like a hidden core. Like if one of these posts is sticking up, I can break it off as I scoop. Well, I don't see any more. Okay, that's good. Alrighty, I'm going to go get this onto the tumbler, and then I'm going to start pouring porcelain. Actually, I'll just take the camera. Alrighty. Let's get the tripod adjusted. Alrighty. Okay. So this has a little bit of fine grit on it. I have a towel over here that I'm gonna wipe it off on. Okay. Oh, that goes on the top anyways. Okay. Alrighty. Now it's just a good matter of getting the porcelain in. And I don't have all my porcelain in one location, so I'm going to have to make several trips. Oop, wrong one. There it is. Not seeing the remainder of my porcelain. I wonder if it's in the bottom of this. No? Come on. I dried it out in there. Alrighty. This is going to make such a mess. This is about probably 40 or 50 pounds of porcelain. And this stuff is expensive. It costs about $20 a pound. Needs more moisture. Alrighty, that's going pretty well. The issue is that I think of my remaining porcelain, I don't think I have enough to fill the other tumbler bowl. I need to buy more porcelain, but like I said, the stuff is expensive, and I lose probably about a pound every time I tumble, just because they wear down, and they go down my sink, and they go onto my carpet, and they go all over the place. So I'm always, going down on porcelain, always having to resupply, and I don't think that's enough for the other tumbler. So I'm just going to let these go for, usually a minimum of 3 days, oftentimes 7, just until I don't think that they're taking any more polish, and then I stop, and then they're done. It's just a matter of getting all the porcelain out of the pieces after that, which unfortunately isn't as easy as vacuuming it up. But I'm going to let this go, and... Oop, wrong one again. I'm going to let this go, and I will resume the video. I will resume it in a couple weeks.